Good morning. I'd like to thank you for joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. During the spring, we've had the wonderful opportunity to travel and watch Rylan, our youngest child, play basketball. I've noticed that more and more of the country, specifically here in the South, is opening as COVID restrictions are being lifted. Now, you might think that after being separated from one another for so long, that we would be happy to start the process of getting back to normal. That us being able to sit at a table at a restaurant with our family and friends or gather together in different settings would be a time of joy. It would be a time of thanksgiving. I had hoped that we would come out of this time of quarantine as a better version of ourselves. The time that we were forced to be apart from one another, that we could have used that to cause us to appreciate one another even more, to give more grace. But it seems that getting back to normal means that, well, everything's getting back to normal, which unfortunately means that we're not just regaining our ability to be in crowds, but we're finding ways for our anger to rear its ugly head in all of its different forms. Basketball gyms are filled with people who have this low burn anger of cynicism and irritation. They're quick to make a snarky comment, to jump in front of you and to take the seat on the bleachers you were headed towards. They feel the need to tell you how a horrible player is, or a coach or a referee is, or they just make outright hurtful statements. And then they say, well, can't you take a joke? People living with low burn anger always seem irritated at everything and at everybody. We used to call them grumpy old men, and well, now it seems that we're all grumpy old men. Sometimes anger is violent, explosive, yelling and screaming. Last weekend we were in Atlanta, which means that we were dealing with traffic, and in the rearview mirror I saw this Tesla coming up pretty quickly. They were whipping through traffic, changing lanes, trying to weave their way to get ahead of everybody. They swung out from behind our van and they sped up, only to have to hit their brakes because the car in front of them and our van, there simply wasn't enough room for them to get over. Well, when I didn't hit my brakes to let them get over in front of me, they went into this full rage, waving their hands in the air, hitting the steering wheel. They were pointing at me. Well, not with this finger, a different one. Even with our windows up and the radio on, we could still hear that man shrieking. He went from 0 to 11 just like that. Sometimes our anger, in our anger, we say words that we should have never said. We say things that should have never been spoken, never in the way that they were spoken. Because we're angry, we say things that we feel like need to be said, or we say things that we feel will make us feel better. But what we end up doing is setting off a grenade in a crowded room, and you can never undo that damage. The truth is, a lot of us walk around angry, even though most of us would never admit it. You might not be an angry person, but I wonder how many times in the last month did you lose your temper? Did you say something you regretted? Solomon was very aware of how anger affects our world, our community, and even the church. Anger is a very normal reaction. That's why Solomon goes back to the topic of anger again and again in the book of Proverbs. He says, people with understanding control their anger. A hot temper shows great foolishness in Proverbs 14:29. He says it's better to be a patient man than a mighty warrior. Better to be someone who controls his temper than someone who conquers a city. That's Proverbs 16:32. Sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. That comes from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11. An angry person starts fights. A hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sins. That's Proverbs 29:22. As rampant as anger is in our culture, there's still a lot of confusion about how angry we really are. You see, we believe that just because we don't explode and lose our temper, that anger is not an issue that we suffer with. The truth is that while anger does happen in those big explosions, for most of us, our struggle with anger is that little anger moment. James asks the question, do you know where your fights and arguments come from in James 4, verse 1? The way that I want to answer that question is yes, I argue and fight with people who upset me. The reason that I get angry is because my wife or my kids or my boss or friend or neighbor neighborhood or traffic or government or stranger or dog. Somebody else made me angry. They did something to upset me. This is the appropriate response. I mean, come on, we live in a broken world, and all of those broken people constantly mess stuff up. It's easy to think that my problem with anger merely exists outside of me. That's not what James says. He says anger comes from the selfish desires that war within you. If you don't get anything else from this sermon, I need you to hear this mustard seed. No one is more influential in your life than you are, because no one talks to you more than you do. You're constantly talking to yourself, though most of us are smart enough not to move our lips or to answer ourselves in public because, well, people might begin to worry. But the truth is, we're always talking to ourselves, and what we tell ourselves is significant. James says we fight with one another because of the selfish desires that live inside our hearts. You crave something you don't possess, so you murder to get it. You desire things you cannot earn, so you sue others and fight for what you want. You don't have because you've chosen not to ask. And when you do ask, well, you still don't get what you want because your motives are all wrong, because you continually focus on self-indulgence. James is saying that when we're angry, we want to look at what's going on out here is a reason for us to be angry. I'm angry because the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, whatever. The truth is that if we ever really want to understand our anger, you got to start by looking in the mirror. We don't explode in anger because of what's happening out there. The source of our anger is, well, it's our heart. It's what's in here. What's happening out there might tip the scale, but my anger is colored and controlled and shaped by what's inside of me. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. Let's say you're sitting in traffic and you look at your watch and you notice that you're going to be late for work, and this is going to be the third time this month. Last time you were late, the boss said, that's it, you can never be late again. And here you are sitting in traffic that's not moving. The folks are sitting in the intersection of a traffic light that's changing all too quickly. You've already sat through the light 2 times, and you begin to talk to the person in front of you. You tell them that they need to move or get out of the way. Because they're not listening and getting out of the way, you begin to get frustrated and you pound on the dashboard and you start talking about this knothead in front of you that, well, has no business learning how to drive. That's when you turn your head and you notice in the car sitting next to you, there's a woman with a big smile on her face. She got her makeup kit open. She's singing a little bit, and she's probably thinking, God must love me because he's given me a little extra time to get ready this morning on my way to work. Now, both of you are dealing with the same problem, but you're not having the same experience. If outside things had the power to make us angry, then the woman putting on her makeup, singing along with the radio, well, she would be just as angry as you are. I mean, I totally get it. Traffic's not fun, yet in our illustration, we have 2 people in the same situation having remarkably different reactions. James says there's a reason for this. Now, I want you to watch this carefully, this little illustration. Ready? Why did water come out of the bottle? You might say, well, water came out of the bottle because you shook it, and that's not the answer. The real answer is water came out of the bottle because there was water in the bottle. I could shake the bottle all day and Coke would never come out of it. When you're shaken by life, you only pour out what's inside of you. That's what Jesus means when he says it's out of the heart that the mouth speaks. You can only spill out what's already inside of you. I've had people blow up about something. I've had people call me things that, well, they're not really worth repeating. I've had people say things to me that would make a sailor's wife blush. And then they look at me and say, I don't know where that came from. That doesn't sound like me. Well, the truth is that might not be what you want the world to know about you, but you said exactly what you meant. If it wasn't inside of you, it couldn't come out. You see, we don't have an anger problem. We don't have a temper problem. We have a heart problem. That's why when we're in a disagreement with someone, when our voice gets a little louder, our face turns red, and we're in mid-yell and the phone rings, and then we pick up the phone and go, "Hey, how you doing?" I mean, you can blame your temper, your heritage, your short fuse, whatever you want to blame. But the truth is that when we get angry, it's because we have anger inside of us. We get angry because other people don't understand how great I am. They don't give me the respect that I think I deserve. They don't allow me to have my way. I mean, after all, I'm much smarter, better looking, athletic, richer, more valuable than they are. Most of our anger comes from this desire to be the greatest in the kingdom. We're not that much different than the apostles. What we need to do is to approach God and beg for forgiveness. We need to ask God to help us find our peace in Him, to live our lives like we understand that the Son of Man came to die and that He alone is worthy to sit on the throne of our hearts. We need to allow the Holy Spirit to guide our life. You see, our temper problem is rooted in the fact that we have squelched out the Holy Spirit in our lives. Paul says that when the Holy Spirit is alive and well, then we have peace, patience, and self-control. I believe it was Joyce Meyer who said, "Anger is not a sin. What you do with it becomes sin." Paul writes in Ephesians 4:26 and 27, when you're angry, don't let it carry you into sin. Don't let the sun set with anger in your heart or give the devil room to work. Paul never says don't get angry or if you get angry. He says when you are angry, because you're going to be angry. But it's not feeling the anger that's the problem. The problem comes when we choose to act poorly on those feelings. Maybe you come home from a long day and you're frustrated before you even walk in the door of your house. As soon as you walk in the house, your spouse, who's been having their own difficult day, they say something that you don't particularly appreciate. So the frustration that you have inside of you spills out. And it comes out as heated words are being exchanged. And, it really doesn't amount to much, but you're going to get your way. You're going to win this argument. And they're determined they're going to get their way. They're going to win the argument. The argument rages on. You both fume during dinner. The kids get bathed and put to bed, and you don't say a word to each other. And when it's finally time to go to bed, you get in bed, and they turn their back towards you, and you turn your back towards them, and you hug your side of the bed so you don't touch each other or breathe each other's air. Paul says you've basically opened the door and said, "Satan, why don't you just come on in here and see what kind of havoc you can cause in our marriage?" You see, that's when the devil comes into our relationships. He brings bitter words, temper tantrums, revenge, profanity, insults. Eventually, you're barely able to say a civil word to one another. I know there was a time that you two just adored one another. You just loved to hear the sound of each other's voice. There was a time when you loved one another and being with one another, and it was the best thing of your life. And now you're living in your own version of a Cold War. You're living in the same place, in the same house, but you're not friends. There's no romance. There's no love. We realize there's a problem, but, it's not my problem. It's her fault. It's his fault. They say it's all your fault, and you've got two really innocent people living in a horribly loveless marriage. The reason that we're in the middle of this mess is not because we were angry. It's because we acted poorly when we were angry. There are a few things that we did that put us in this predicament, and it's not working out well for us at all. We personalized something that wasn't personal. We made it all about me, which is a really tempting thing to do. I like to say that we're the star of our own movies, the movie about our lives. We're in every scene. We have dialogue on every page. So it's easy to think that everyone else out there in the world is as interested in me as I'm interested in myself. What we forget is that everybody's starring in their own movie. You're just a part of their supporting cast. So when somebody does something that aggravates you, they're not smacking their gum to get a reaction from you. They're smacking their gum because, they just smack gum. Sometimes we ignore the opportunity to love others. The second command is just like the first, love your neighbor as yourself. But when I'm angry, I get so offended by you that I refuse to love you. You're no longer someone created in the image of God. Now you've become my adversary. I refuse to see any goodness in you. I refuse to see you the way that God sees you, because I'm greatest in the kingdom and you're nothing more than an annoying gnat. And in my mind, because you're so insignificant, you're not worthy of my love. So I just dismiss you. I forfeit the opportunity to walk alongside you, to be involved in what God is doing in your life. I refuse to allow you to be a part of what God's doing in my life. And all of this is because I got angry and made the choice that I wasn't going to love you, which finally leads to becoming adversarial. I make jokes about you or snarky little comments so that people will know how great I am and how worthless you are. I find the areas of your life that don't meet up to my standards and I gossip about you behind your back. And when I find that I have to talk to you, it's just this quick little response that I don't really ever get to the heart of what's going on. I'm quick to break off any relationship that we might have had. I make it difficult on other people who want to have a relationship with you. You see, I've not only chosen sides, I expect other people to pick my side as well. I change locations so I can be with people who think I'm great and you're trash. I yell condemnation at a person. I make a threat. I try to manipulate people. And the next thing you know, I'm in this huge mess because I've acted selfishly and poorly. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul's encouraging Christians in Corinth to live a life that is worthy of the sacrifice of Christ. He reminds them that God redeemed them and that redemption should cause them to live differently than the culture in which they find themselves. Paul says in verse 15, talking about Jesus, he died for all, and those who live should not from now on live for themselves. The sin in our lives causes us to close off our world. Our sin causes us to think about ourselves and only about ourselves. You weren't created or redeemed to live that way. I was never meant to have a life that's driven by what I want, when I want it, where I want it, how I want it. Because I'm not the greatest in the kingdom. That throne belongs to Jesus. You and I were both created and redeemed to live lives of love. Love trumps anger. Love trumps everything. The logic of love outweighs every other logic that we have. Love gives us the power to overcome when we want to give in. Love gives us the power to accept when we want to reject. Love gives us the ability to forgive when we want to condemn. And love gives us the ability to speak words of peace when we're tempted to rail in our anger. I was raised with the teaching that the gospel is how you get people in the baptistry. I now understand that's not the gospel. The gospel is how we declare the love of God in this world, and that His love has changed everything. The gospel is what we experience when we go to the tables. His love is the power that we have to look beyond ourselves and our feelings to see God at work in the lives of other people. The bread and the cup are simply reminders that His overwhelming love calls us to be part of His kingdom. And if we're going to be part of His kingdom, we must live our lives doing kingdom work. Not out of a sense of duty or out of fear that God's going to punish us if we fail to perform. We live and love and work in the kingdom out of thanksgiving for His love that's changed everything in our world. This morning, if you're living in anger, God is calling you to explore His overwhelming love for you. Because the only force stronger than anger is love. And so, as we go to the tables this morning, I want us to consider the real source of our anger. And then I want us to ask God to help us become more like Him. Because it's only when we live in love that we can be like Jesus, that we can walk like Jesus, that we can share the truth of Jesus as we model love in our cities. I hope you have a wonderful time of communion around the table, that you are able to have a good conversation, and this week that you'll be able to be a little less angry as you grow in love. Please go in peace, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.